in time, no longer living, named Milton Erickson. And he's a U.S. psychiatrist. When he was alive, he began to get a reputation for being able to be successful with the impossibles. So people would send to him, those who knew him would send him the people that they gave up on. And then Dr. Erickson was famous for finding a way. And so my experience with Dr. Erickson started, I had the opportunity to go and visit Dr. Erickson for a week. Towards the end of his life, the last couple of years, he primarily spent time with small groups of therapists where he would do these informal teaching seminars, where mostly what he was doing was just sharing stories about his client work. And back when I lived in Wisconsin and this person came to see me or whatever, and this happened. Meanwhile, everyone had the sense that more was going on than met the eye, that things were happening that weren't spoken about. The interesting thing is that Dr. Erickson thought of everything that he was doing as just therapy. And he had no spiritual beliefs, he had no spiritual orientation at all. And yet, as I'll begin to share with you, my own experience was something that I only later realized seemed to be the same kind of thing. So, but back in time to when I went to see him, a friend of mine who was a therapist called me up and said, "I'm organizing a group to see Dr. Erickson. Would you like to join in?" And yes, a big yes from my end. And I explained to her also how I was going through a really difficult time in my life right then. And we were personal friends, so I was just sharing with her. And at that point, my struggles had to do with my relationship with my partner, who's now my husband. But at that point, we were very unsure if we would have a partnership in the future. I felt it was the time to either get clear this relationship was going to work or to go part ways. And at the time we were running trainings together, we had a training organization, we'd published 2 books together. Our lives were pretty intertwined on a practical level, and but more to the point, on an emotional level, I felt a kind of neediness where I didn't feel clean about the relationship. I felt I needed it, and so I couldn't make my choice from a place of balance, I guess. So I felt this neediness, and at the same time, very strong sense that some things about this relationship were not on track. So I didn't know what to do. No choice seemed good. So I was sharing this with my friend, and she said, "Well, why don't you ask Dr. Erickson to have a private session with you?" And she explained to me how he had worked with her privately on something similar just very recently, and he'd helped her. She wasn't sure if she was going to stay married or get divorced, and he helped her have clarity on that. In her case, she decided for a divorce, but it was a clean divorce. It felt like the right thing, and that's how it went. And so I said, okay, that's what I'll do. So I went, and I arrived in Phoenix, Arizona, where Dr. Erickson lived at that time. And he would spend a week with a small group of people. So there was a week of about 3 to 4 hours a day that he would see these small groups of therapists. So on the very first day, we're checking in, and I introduced myself, and I asked, I was nervous. Dr. Erickson is a famous guy, and I had totally admired him. I'd read his work, and also he had the reputation for changing people without their knowledge and in ways that they sometimes least expected. So I was a little nervous, like, what am I signing up for, and what might he turn me into? And I sure hope I still like myself, after this. But also, perhaps I should say also that I had a history of being a difficult client. So other things didn't work for me. And I'd had therapists tell me that. They'd tell me, the things I do usually work with people, but they don't work with you. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry.
So you were Milton Erickson's perfect client by the
time. So yeah. Here I was, the impossible, coming to see him. And so I got my courage up, though, and said, Dr. Erickson, will you work with me privately? And I probably had more shakiness in my voice. But I was pleased. He smiled at me, and he nodded, and he total congruent, yes. And then he turned away. And so I was a bit confused. What's happening here? You know, he says yes, that was clear, but what do I do next? How do I set up the session? So I thought, well, I'll just wait and see. Dr. Erickson is a very authoritative person. I didn't feel, you know, you sort of wait for him to give you the cues what to do next, or at least I did. So we all go into the meeting room where we're going to sit with Dr. Erickson. He starts telling his stories about his clients. And I'm thinking at some point it'll become clear to me how to set up this session. In the middle of that first morning, he shares with us this little personal incident. He says, oh, recently I got a letter in the mail. It was from the licensing board. And in it said that my license has expired for individual therapy. So I can no longer do individual therapy. And he laughed like it was the funniest thing. and meanwhile, I was not laughing. I was going, oh dear, you know, what does this mean? It sounds like he can't see me. And so I was nervous about it. So as the day went on, though, I thought, well, maybe he meant he'll use me as a demo person, because occasionally I could see he would start demonstrating with someone. And so he was also a hypnotist. He was a psychiatrist. He was a hypnotist. And he would start demonstrating some kind of hypnotic phenomena or something. And I thought, okay, maybe that's how I'll get my individual work. So I started trying to be really cooperative, you know. Every time he'd say the word trance, my eyelids would flutter, you know. Like, yes, I will be a willing subject. And but he didn't pick me, and he didn't pick me the next day either. And I was getting a little more nervous again about, would this ever work for me? But I started to notice that often he would work with the person who was sitting in the chair to his immediate left. So I thought, okay, that's my chair tomorrow. And I came early, I made sure I got that chair, and I thought, okay. But he still didn't work with me. So, okay, so each day what was happening is each day I would go and I would be hopeful. Something might happen, and then each day I would be disappointed. Well, one day, on the next day after that, I wasn't sitting in the left seat chair anymore. He finally did use me as a demo person, and he guided me through some simple little induction. I thought, oh good, here it is, you know, finally. But nothing seemed to be happening. At least I couldn't tell anything. So again, I was quite disappointed. And after that, this was 4 days out of the 5, and after that, I thought, okay, I'm giving up. It looks like there's nothing here for me. So I decided that the next day I would go in, and at least earlier I'd been just trying to go into a trance so that he'd have easy access to my unconscious mind. This was my thinking anyway. I'm sure it wasn't at all helpful to him, but that was what I was trying to do, be a cooperative client. And on the last day, I thought, that's not working. At least I'm going to stay wide awake, and I'm going to watch and listen to everything he's doing with everyone else, because I had some understanding, at least from my NLP background and studying his work, of the kind of thing he was likely to be doing and marking things out for the unconscious and so on. At least I thought I understood part of it. So I thought, at least I'm going to watch. I'm just going to stay awake. I'm going to watch what he does with everyone else, and I'll learn something at least. So that's what I did. And I felt like, oh, I am learning something. I could see, it seemed like things he was marking out to other people made sense. I knew some of them. And so I thought, okay, I'm at least getting some value here. Not for me personally, but at least me as a trainer and coach and so on. So about an hour and a half into that meeting, I was sitting there, just as I described, and all of a sudden I felt this shift come over me, and it was in a split second. It was instant, and it's something that I've struggled ever since then to actually describe in words. It was just this shift and I felt like a completely different person. I felt different than I had ever felt before. That's how I put it then. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I'd never felt anything like this before. And if I would try to put it into words, it was just this sense of deep, deep well-being, and this sense of everything being okay, and deeply okay. and everything is okay, everything will be okay. And as I was experiencing this, I was wondering, how did this happen? And could he have done this? And at that moment, he turned to me, he looked at me, and he said, and your unconscious mind has just made an important decision. And I thought, okay, he does know about it, and I think he had something to do with this. And then I was thinking to myself, I had this feeling that everything was somehow resolved. I didn't know how it was resolved. I had no idea what I would do. I didn't have a quote answer to my question, but I just had this knowing that everything is resolved. Nothing has to be worked out. There's no problem.
Right.
That was really clear.
And that actually translated to your experience of your relationship at the time as well.
Yes, and the story with Dr. Erickson went a little bit longer, because at that moment, as I was having that thought, he said to me, and you don't know what it is. So he knew that it was a very unconscious, it was not about a conscious mind idea. And then I also had the thought, if he offered to set up a private session, I don't know what I would work with.
Wow.
And then he, at that moment, as I had that thought, he said to me, and do you still feel the need to work with me privately? And I was going, woo, woo, woo. Okay, is he reading my inner dialogue or thought process? I don't know. I still don't know, but it was quite uncanny how he seemed to be tracking my experience in each thing he said. And I was a little frustrated when he said, do you still feel the need to work with me privately? And I really couldn't find a need, I really couldn't. So that was the end of that, except that I had no idea what I was going to do, And I wasn't thinking of this as a spiritual experience. I just thought it was a good experience. Right. I just thought, this is good. I don't know what I'm going to do, but somehow it wasn't a concern that I didn't know what I was going to do. And then over the next week or so, I could feel this sort of percolating inside. And this also is hard to describe, but it was as if something was happening. There was a processing occurring where I knew when the time was right that I would be clear on what to do and I would take the action appropriate. And I had no concern. That had never happened to me before. I was always this semi-neurotic person. Meanwhile, when I went through this experience, it didn't occur to me that this was the same thing that the spiritual teachers talk about, because, I guess he didn't define it in spiritual terms. And I made the assumption at that time that probably everyone else besides me always felt the way I was feeling right then, and this sort of feel of deep peace. I know that's not true now.
If only, right?
They were right. If that were right, the world would be a lot happier place for all of us. Anyway, it did come to pass over the next week or so. The clarity came, and I became clear that there were 3 things that needed to be in place if I was going to go forward with my relationship, and that hadn't been clear before, but it was really clear. So I sat down with Steve, my partner, and shared with him what I was now clear on. This would need to be what it looks like for me to be going forward with this relationship and committing to this. And we were talking about, either we get married, we have kids, do the whole thing, or we split, So, it felt so good to me to do that, to have that level of clarity, which I'd never had before in my life, and to also know, as I was laying it out, that I both was totally in love with this man, but also I had no need for him to say yes to me.
That's beautiful.
It was, and it was wonderful to feel that way. Like I could just totally love him as I shared this from my end, and then wait for him. And then I said, I don't know if this will fit for you, and I know that's your choice. That's up to you, and you can take some time to think about it, But that clarity was, I loved it. And so the only problem was that didn't last. The clarity was there for a while, and then it gradually started to unravel. So I've been going on here a bit. I don't know if I...
But I think what strikes me is that you tasted something that showed you a potential of something else. And it's like, it sounds like you went to a place where either the problem didn't exist or the problem didn't matter. It's like there was something more fundamental that was there that somehow dwarfed this, kind of put into perspective perhaps the kind of more egoic life stuff that was going on, and therefore gave you a different clarity and different perspective around
Yes, and it felt so good to be relating to other people, not just my partner, but I could feel it in other contexts and relationships where there was this ease and this, the neediness that I described wasn't there.
Right.
And there was just knowing that things were okay and each of us makes our own choices and not needing someone else to make a choice that would fit for me.
Yes.
So.
And then how, because you mentioned at the start you had 2 experiences, and so and then there was another experience. So talk us through that.
And what you said just a little bit ago about this reference experience, this became a reference experience for me. It showed me what was possible. So this started fading, and I started again feeling like more emotionally reactive and more like I did care and did need things from other people. And so I wanted to go back to Dr. Erickson. He was my answer the first time. I wanted to go again.
So he was the source.
He was the source, yeah, in my view. So I set up another time to go. It was all arranged. It was scheduled in the books. And then I got the call, he's dead. He died shortly before it was time to go see him again. So that was devastating for me. I was very disappointed. My source was gone.
Right.
But then I knew I was on my own and I needed to find my own way back. I knew now something was possible, and so it's like no stone would be left unturned until...
It was kind of his final gift, in a sense.
Yeah, it was a gift. And so that's what led to the core transformation work, which you mentioned, and we're not going to be focusing on that here today, but that is also a kind of inner transformation where we follow our limitations through to an inner source of well-being like that. But even after the core transformation work came to me, the core transformation was having profound effect on other people, but I was experiencing, again, my own being a difficult client, where it was having an effect on me, but it was really gradual. So what I experienced instantly with Dr. Erickson, I felt like I was very gradually, very slowly having to reclaim now. And many of my clients, they would go through, one session and they'd go through, wow, that was so profound, and
must have been quite frustrating.
Great, I'm glad it's profound for you. I was kind of envious of that, the speed with which they seem to, some, not everyone, but some would have that experience. So then the second time, this was after I'd been doing the core transformation work with other people and in myself for quite a while. And then there was a second life crisis. It was it felt like a much deeper crisis. It felt like everything was falling apart. It was not a fun time. Everything was falling apart on all levels. I again felt challenges in my relationship. I felt challenges. I thought I was dying physically. It was that I was experiencing symptoms so bizarre and strange that I thought the only way I could understand this was that I was dying. And some of what was happening was so intense I didn't see how a body could survive it, was part of it. So I thought I probably wasn't long for the world. But I did have the thought that if I was going to have a chance at surviving, and I was interested in that.
Good, okay.
I was interested in that. That if I was going to have a chance at that, I just thought I need to do everything different. So that was my next thing. I need to give up everything that I thought I knew. I was an NLP trainer at that time. I was doing, and a bit of a unusual one perhaps, I was doing core transformation, which is a little, since it started intersecting with more the spiritual area, it's not mainstream NLP, shall we say. So yes, things are falling apart. I gave up that. I thought, I'm giving up the NLP. I'm giving up everything. And where can I find some help? I didn't know, but I thought perhaps I would find it in the spiritual disciplines. So that's where I went searching. That was my next. So I always, from my NLP experience, from my personal, prior to NLP, all my life, I've been convinced by experience, not by arguments or ideas. Right. So I was interested in spiritual accounts, and especially people who describe their own awakenings and And that sounded a little bit like what I experienced with Dr.
Right.
Erickson. I still didn't recognize it to the degree I now do as the same thing, but it looked good. I'd like some of that.
Some more of that.
Yeah. So I started exploring there, and that's what ended up leading to the wholeness work.
Right.
Through the work of especially a teacher named Ramana Maharshi. Do I say that right? I'm never confident I am.
It's so funny when I always have to go, so Ramana Maharishi, I have to slow myself down.
Ramana Maharshi, is that
it's good
something
enough.
like that?
It's good enough for me.
It's good. Yeah, I figure there will be forgiveness on some level. The intention is there. So that
if there's not forgiveness, then
I've been on the wrong
right?
track. Yeah, so a specific teacher of Ramana Maharshi, a specific teaching of Ramana Maharshi is what led to the beginning of the wholeness work. And still I wouldn't have got there without that my own reference experience that actually came through a psychiatrist, not your typical guru person. But I think this is how I end up having this affinity for this overlap between the spiritual domain and the personal growth, personal development, personal healing.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that in a sense what you've done is taken experiences that you've had and you've lived, some pointing and some ideas from Ramana Maharishi, say it slowly, and the kind of mapping and capacity to track things and put a method around things that you have from NLP. So in a sense, it's a meeting of those different elements, which is what it sounds like has helped birth.
Yes, it is. What happened with Milton Erickson was more like a transmission experience or a grace experience. From my point of view, it just happened.
Right.
There was no effort on my part. And then it's interesting because what I got from the personal growth side there was the effortless grace transmission.
Right.
And then what I got actually from the spiritual side was a bit of an idea, a philosophy, a way of understanding life, human experience that was different than from the personal growth side, that helped me then to find a way to make it not so mysterious, to find how can we approach this step by step in experience so that anyone interested in this can find their way.
Right. Because that's one of the things that can frustrate people, and it can lose a lot of people in the kind of more traditional spiritual path, is that people, they know there's something that they're wanting to experience and something other people are experiencing, but the pointings or the instructions don't have enough clarity sometimes, and people go round and round and round trying to kind of land somewhere. And there's something, as I understand it, about a simple methodology that is very helpful in this work.
Yes, it has to be, not any simple methodology will work, but I think it has to be one that has a minimum of theory idea in it, and what can sound like mumbo jumbo, just the concepts, the spiritual concepts. Yes, I started thinking about, Ramana Maharishi, if that's the right way to say it. What is he getting at here? He had this teaching about, and he would offer it to people with many different kinds of problems, from practical problems to spiritual problems to relationship problems. And he would often offer the same teaching, and he would say, find out who you really are, and you won't have this question anymore. Just find out who you really are. So that's where if you feel, do you feel we're ready? Are we ready to go there next to the group guide, the beginning of the experience?
I think we're pretty curious.
Okay. Well, perhaps I could say first, before we go there, what I got from the spiritual side, and especially Eastern spirituality, but it's also in the Christian tradition. I could talk about that later. That was my own background, was the Christian tradition. This idea that suffering is somehow caused by the ego. And if the ego, or the small self, as Ramana Maharshi would call it, if that were dissolved or didn't exist anymore in its form, then suffering would not be there anymore. So now that's a good idea, right? Doesn't that sound appealing?
Sure
Suffering, no. But the thing is that I sat in satsangs or and other spiritual meetings of many different varieties for a number of years, attempting to approach this. And I sat there attempting to let it happen by grace, let the transmission come. I'm in favor of that. Heck, if,
Right.
it's like if it can just come to me and take me over, great. And for a while, I think because some of the teachings from teachers that I did and still do respect were saying, if there are steps, it's not the way. Or that old idea, the way that can be spoken is not the way. And but I think there's a misunderstanding there. Concepts are not going to be useful to get us there. Concepts can never get us there. And so that, in that sense, the way that can be spoken is not the way that's going to actually get us there. They can give us a reference experience, though, like it offered to me, and that can be useful. But to get us there, it is possible to have a simple procedure, and that's different than concepts. It's completely different. And that's what we're going to be exploring today. What's the procedure for finding the ego and dissolving it? I saw people in groups sit around discussing that for hours, weeks, months,
People can write whole books about it, right? And not ever have the experience.
Yes. Okay, and I think it's because the spiritual teachers were the authentic ones, and there are many of those, I think. The authentic ones were attempting to describe what for them perhaps happened by grace or without a real clear knowledge of exactly the shift that occurred. So then it was more poetic, like Rumi's poetry or in many of the spiritual writings in every discipline. It's poetic. Just like me in trying to describe my experience with Dr. Erickson, I come up short of words. It's hard to get that across.
Yeah, it's like the steps don't replace the experience, and they don't guarantee someone's going to have the experience, but somehow they make it easier to find someone's own guidance towards that.
Yes, I do think so. It's easier then to recognize it. It's like, oh, this sounds like a Rumi poem, or what I read in the Bible, or what I read somewhere, this sounds like that. And it can help give us that reference experience so we recognize it when we do experience it. And I think I'm going to offer this, you have on your webpage, I know, but I'm going to add this here too. The procedure is it's like understanding a sunset. The procedure for awakening, in my opinion, is somewhat like that. You can't really tell someone who's never experienced a sunset what it's like in words alone and expect it to do much. You can try, but if they've really never experienced a sunset, they're not going to fully get it. Probably not much at all. So that's the way in which words don't suffice. And yet, we can all recognize that it's very simple to come up with a set of steps, a simple procedure that each of us, any person on this earth, can take to experience a sunset for ourselves. If you're inside, walk outside, find a place where there's a clear, not a lot of buildings, or go to the top of one, face the west at such and such a time, in whatever time zone you're in, and you will inevitably experience a sunset. So if the procedure is good enough, it's inevitable you have that experience for yourself. Now, it's possible that the first night there were clouds.
Especially in London.
Especially in London, yes.
Almost guaranteed in London.
Yeah. So it's possible you follow the procedure, you do it all right, and the first time out, there's no sunset. What are they speaking of? Is the procedure wrong? And know that you've got the procedure perhaps, but there may be a little tweaking or something needs to be a little different. And then if you stick with it and follow that procedure, you will, at some point in time, experience the sunset. If nothing else, you go to a location where there's less fog,
Right, exactly. So also maybe at this point, just to more formally welcome our in-person audience, and also for people that are watching at home, as you guide the group here through the process, people at home can also follow along. So this is not a section for people just to watch kind of analytically, but it's really for them to watch experientially, i.e. to really follow with the process.
Absolutely. That's the way to really understand it is in experience. It can't be understood mentally.
Yeah. So just a couple of tips for people watching at home for that. If you were here in the room, you wouldn't be on your phone and web surfing. So the recommendation is, if you want to really experience the intimacy and kind of connection as if you were here, to just take away distractions at home, just give yourself 20, 30 minutes, I guess it'll be roughly, to just follow with the process. Because it'll be a very different experience, I think, doing it that way than just kind of analyzing and observing.
Yes. And this first phase won't be quite that long, I think. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Anyway, for however long it takes.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Great.
Okay, we ready to roll? All right. So, to start with this idea about the ego, that if enlightenment happens through dissolving the ego, and we can get off the wheel of suffering, as the Buddha put it, by letting go of our ego, then that sounds like a good thing. But what is the ego, right? So the first answer that came to me on what is the ego, in terms of direct experience, I'm going in the direct experience, not conceptual direction, is it's the I. It's the I. Now, we're still not to direct experience. But we use this word I constantly in our daily lives, in our inner dialogue. It's like, I'm sitting here in the chair, I'm listening. Later I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing that. If we're talking to someone else, it's I this, I that. The word I is among the most frequently used words in every language. So it's a significant word. So we're going to begin there. And we're going to get there a little indirectly. Here's how we're going to do it. Because we're still not at direct experience. We could still discuss what's the I and spend years and centuries and lifetimes doing it and not really get anywhere. So here's what we can do to make it really simple. Sitting wherever you are, and the people at home, if you can find a comfortable position, whatever position you're in, let yourself get even a little bit more comfortable. If you want to make a few adjustments, that's fine. And I'm going to be doing it along with everyone else. And then you can do this either with your eyes open or closed. If you'd like, you can allow your eyes to close. And then just notice for a moment your body. So I'm sensing my body. You can each sense your body. And I'd like you to just notice any body sensation. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be meaningful. It's just the first sensation that comes to you, that comes to your awareness. Go with that. So I feel this sensation right now in my abdomen, just a little bit under the surface of my skin. And maybe it's a little warmth or something like that. So just notice some sensation. It can be anywhere. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever you notice. So it could be, I notice the place where my sit bones contact whatever I'm sitting on. It could be absolute anything. So has everyone noticed something? Everyone here? Okay, great. Great. And you can notice just a little bit of the sensation there, the sensation quality. For me, I was telling you I notice a little bit of warmth. It's here in my abdomen, and I was noticing a little warmth. Sometimes it can be a little sense of buzziness or movement, or there might be a sense of heaviness or lightness. It can be anything. Just notice whatever you notice. And then, now you could say or think, and it would be true, I am aware of this sensation, right? I can say, and it would be true, I am aware of this sensation as I'm noticing this in my abdomen. I am aware of this sensation. So I'd like you to think that thought for a moment. I am aware of this sensation, whatever the sensation is that you're noticing. Say that to yourself. Think that thought. Notice that is true in this moment. I am aware of this sensation. And then, now I get to the weird question, and I'm going to ask you something that might seem a little bit strange, and that's okay. Just notice the very first answer, whatever first comes to mind, and it doesn't have to make sense. And the question is, where is the I who notices? Where's the I who's aware of this sensation? So when we say or think, I am aware of this sensation, where's the I located? And this is in space around, or it could be within the body, it could be in the space around, but just what location comes to you when you ask that question. I am aware of this sensation. And how many of you here in the audience here with us today already have, if you would raise your hand if you already have the answer. Okay. Most of you, not quite all of you. And if you're not sure, it's fine to just guess. Oftentimes when people aren't sure, they had an answer come to them and they discarded it. That's the most frequent reason that people aren't sure. Because usually when we go, I am aware of the sensation, we go, where's the I located? It's a split second. It's right there. If we're aware of if we just ask that question, it's just we never thought to ask that question. We were so focused on the sensation, on the content of what we're aware of. And now we're switching it, going, where is the I who's aware of the sensation? So without thinking it out, figuring it out, what's the location? Where's the I located? Now I'm going to invite a few of you who already have an answer to share, just so we begin to get a sense of the range of possibilities. So who would like to share what the answer is for you, what the location is? Anyone? If not, I can.